Hello, dear hunter. Welcome back to another journey through the haunting, beautiful world of Bloodborne. Tonight, we're going to explore one of the most tragic, compelling figures in all of From Software's masterful storytelling. So settle in, get comfortable, adjust your pillows, and let the story wash over you like waves against a distant shore. Tonight's tale is about Lady Maria of the Astral Clocktower, a noble warrior whose journey from aristocratic halls to eternal guardianship encompasses everything that makes Bloodborne's narrative so profound and moving. This is a story about duty and guilt, about noble intentions corrupted by impossible circumstances, and about how even the strongest spirits can be broken by the weight of their own conscience. Before we begin, let me set the scene for you. Imagine the Astral Clocktower, positioned at the very peak of the research hall, its massive astronomical instruments turning slowly in the dim light. At its center sits a figure, motionless as a statue, blood flowing perpetually from self-inflicted wounds. This is Lady Maria, frozen in the moment of her greatest sacrifice, serving as eternal guardian to secrets she died trying to protect. Her story is one of the most complete character tragedies in video game history. It's a tale that asks difficult questions about moral responsibility, institutional corruption, and whether individual goodness can survive within systems designed to exploit it. Through Maria's eyes, we'll witness the gradual erosion of noble purpose, the desperate search for redemption, and the ultimate price of trying to stand against forces larger than oneself. What makes Maria's story so powerful is its foundation in genuine nobility. This isn't a tale of someone who started evil and stayed that way. Maria began with the purest intentions, the highest ideals, and a genuine desire to use her considerable skills to protect others and serve noble causes. Her tragedy lies not in moral weakness, but in the impossible situations that forced her to choose between terrible options, each compromise leading inexorably to the next, until she could no longer recognize the person she had become. The name Maria itself carries prophetic weight. Derived from Latin origins, it means sea or bitterness. And truly, Maria became a sea of bitterness, not through malice or cruelty, but through the accumulation of guilt and moral compromise that gradually filled her until nothing else remained. Her story is the ocean, deep and dark, beautiful and terrible, containing multitudes. As we explore her journey tonight, we'll move slowly through each phase of her life. From her noble birth in Cainhurst Castle, through her training as Gehrman's most promising student, to her participation in the fishing Hamlet massacre that would shatter her spirit. We'll walk beside her through the research hall, where she tried desperately to find some form of redemption by caring for experimental subjects, only to find herself complicit in new forms of cruelty. And finally, we'll stand with her at the Astral Clocktower, understanding the choice that led her to take her own life and the transformation that made her an eternal guardian. This is a story told through fragments and implications, through item descriptions and environmental details, through combat mechanics and musical themes. Bloodborne doesn't give us Maria's inner monologue or explicit explanations of her thoughts. Instead, it trusts us to piece together her psychology from the evidence left behind. The game treats us as investigators, asking us to understand Maria through what she chose to keep, what she threw away, where she positioned herself, and how she fights. So let us begin at the beginning, in the cold stone halls of Cainhurst Castle, where a young noble girl made the first of many choices that would define her tragic arc. Let the soft rhythm of these words carry you gently into understanding, and perhaps into sleep. This is the complete story of Lady Maria of the Astral Clocktower. To understand Lady Maria's tragedy, we must first understand where she came from. Cainhurst Castle stands as one of Bloodborne's most significant locations, even though we only visit it briefly. It represents everything about aristocratic excess, the corruption of noble blood, and the ways in which power and breeding can twist human nature into something simultaneously magnificent and monstrous. Cainhurst was home to an ancient bloodline of nobles who had mastered the art of blood magic. These weren't mere aristocrats playing at power. They were individuals who had learned to manipulate their own vital essence, bending the very substance of life to their will. This blood magic allowed them to enhance their combat abilities, perform ceremonies of great power, and mark themselves as fundamentally different from common humanity. It was both their greatest achievement and the source of their gradual descent into something far removed from ordinary human experience. At the head of this bloodline sat Queen Annalise, the immortal ruler of the Vilebloods. Eternal, unchanging, she embodied both the apex of Cainhurst's power and the ultimate expression of its corruption. The Queen's immortality wasn't natural or divine. It was achieved through blood magic, so profound that it had removed her from the normal cycles of life and death entirely. She existed in a state of eternal stasis, forever young, forever powerful, forever waiting for subjects to bring her the blood dregs that sustained her court's dark purposes. Into this world of blood-soaked nobility, Lady Maria was born. As a distant relative of Queen Annalise herself, Maria was born into one of the most prestigious and simultaneously cursed lineages in all of Gehrman's history. From birth, she possessed the inherent ability to manipulate blood magic, a talent that marked her as true Cainhurst nobility. This wasn't something that could be learned or acquired. It was written into her very essence, passed down through generations of aristocratic breeding. But Maria was different from her noble kin in ways that would prove both defining and tragic. While she possessed the natural aptitude for blood magic that characterized all Cainhurst nobles, she found herself fundamentally opposed to these practices. Something in her nature rebelled against the idea of drawing power from the manipulation of blood and essence. She looked at the blood arts practiced by her relatives and saw not achievement, but corruption. Not power, but a form of spiritual degradation that she wanted no part of. This rejection wasn't based on lack of ability. Maria could have mastered blood magic as thoroughly as any Cainhurst noble. Her bloodline guaranteed that much. But she chose not to. She chose instead the more difficult path of pure technique and skill-based combat. This was a revolutionary choice in Cainhurst society, where one's worth was measured largely by one's ability to manipulate blood. By rejecting these arts, Maria was essentially rejecting her birthright and everything that made Cainhurst nobles special. Her weapon of choice reflected this philosophical stance perfectly. The rakuyo, a trick weapon crafted by the powder kegs, was designed to be wielded through dexterity and skill rather than supernatural enhancement. Unlike the blood blades favored by other Cainhurst nobles, which drew power directly from the wielder's vital essence, the rakuyo responded only to technique and training. It was a weapon that demanded years of practice to master effectively, offering no shortcuts and accepting no substitutes for genuine skill. The rakuyo itself is a masterwork of weapon design. Originating from the same eastern land as the chikage, it embodies a completely different philosophy. Where the chikage literally feeds on the user's blood to enhance its power, the rakuyo requires no such sacrifice. Its elegant dual-blade design allows it to function as both a single katana-like weapon and as paired blades when transformed. The name rakuyo means fallen leaves in Japanese, a poetic image that would prove prophetic when we consider Maria's ultimate fate. The weapon's design philosophy perfectly embodied Maria's approach to both combat and life. She believed in achieving excellence through dedication and discipline rather than supernatural shortcuts. She valued the beauty of perfected technique over raw power gained through corruption of essence. DreamScrolls de summon virus. She valued the beauty of perfected technique over raw power gained through corruption of essence. She verfiua were firager fewer. Yaru Ross, Henbrus, the Netherja, Will the Wonsel, Roath, Albor. Every strike with the rakuyo was a statement of values, an assertion that there was a better way to achieve strength and purpose than the path her noble relatives had chosen. Training with the rakuyo was brutally demanding. The weapon's dual-blade configuration required perfect timing and spatial awareness. Each form had to be mastered separately. Then the transitions between forms had to become second nature. Maria spent years developing the muscle memory and instinctive understanding necessary to wield the rakuyo at the highest level. This dedication to craft, this willingness to embrace difficulty in pursuit of excellence, would characterize her approach to everything she undertook. The social implications of Maria's choices cannot be understated. In Cainhurst's rigid aristocratic society, refusing to utilize one's noble blood was tantamount to rejecting one's entire identity. It was a statement that the traditional power structures were flawed, that there was a better way to achieve strength than the methods that had sustained Cainhurst for generations. This wasn't just personal preference. It was quiet rebellion, a challenge to everything Cainhurst represented. Her fellow nobles would have viewed Maria's choices with a mixture of incomprehension and disdain. To them, she was wasting her natural gifts, squandering the advantages that their bloodline provided. Some may have seen her dedication to skill-based combat as a form of pride or stubbornness, an attempt to prove something that didn't need proving. Others may have viewed it as weakness, an inability to embrace the full power of Cainhurst heritage. But Maria maintained her course despite this social pressure. She continued to train with the Rakuyo, to perfect her technique, to pursue excellence through discipline rather than supernatural enhancement. This stubborn independence, this willingness to stand alone against the expectations of her entire social class, revealed a strength of character that would both define her greatest achievements and contribute to her eventual tragedy. The castle itself, with its cold stone halls and Gothic architecture, served as the backdrop for Maria's formative years. Every room spoke of centuries of accumulated power and tradition. The very walls seemed to whisper of blood magic and aristocratic privilege. Growing up in such an environment while rejecting its core values must have created a profound sense of isolation. Maria was surrounded by her own kind, yet fundamentally alone in her beliefs and choices. This early period of her life established patterns that would persist throughout her story. Maria was someone who committed fully to her chosen path, regardless of difficulty or social consequences. She set high standards for herself and worked tirelessly to meet them. She believed that there were right and wrong ways to achieve power, and she was willing to sacrifice convenience and easy advancement in service of her principles. These qualities made her exceptional, but they also set her up for devastating disillusionment when the world failed to live up to her ideals. Eventually, Maria made the decision to leave Cainhurst entirely. This departure represented more than just a personal journey. It was the complete rejection of an entire way of life. She was leaving behind wealth, status, family connections, and everything familiar to pursue something she believed to be more noble and pure. The decision couldn't have been easy. She was abandoning not just a physical location, but her entire identity as a Cainhurst noble. What drew her away from Cainhurst was the promise of something better. Stories had reached the castle of the hunters, warriors who protected Gehrman's citizens from the beast scourge, who used their skills in service of genuine good rather than aristocratic power games. The hunters, as Maria understood them from a distance, represented everything she valued: skill, purpose, protection of the innocent, and a calling that transcended mere social advancement. And among the hunters, one figure stood out above all others: Gehrman, the first hunter. His reputation had spread even to isolated Cainhurst. He was described as a master craftsman, a brilliant warrior, and the architect of the entire hunting tradition. For Maria, seeking to escape Cainhurst's corruption while finding a worthy use for her considerable skills, Gehrman represented the perfect mentor, and the hunters represented the perfect calling. So Maria left the cold stone halls of Cainhurst Castle, the Rakuyo at her side, carrying with her the best aspects of noble training, while rejecting the corrupt blood magic that had defined her lineage. She departed in search of something purer, more meaningful, more truly noble than anything Cainhurst could offer. She left believing that she could find purpose and moral clarity in the service of protecting humanity from the beast scourge. This decision, like so many in Maria's life, was made with the purest intentions and the highest ideals. She couldn't have known that she was trading one form of corruption for another, that the hunters would eventually demand compromises just as devastating as anything Cainhurst had offered. The tragedy was already in motion, though Maria wouldn't recognize it until far too late. Maria's arrival at the hunter's workshop marked the beginning of the most significant relationship of her life. Her apprenticeship under Gehrman would shape not only her combat abilities, but her fundamental understanding of what it meant to be a hunter in Gehrman's dark streets. This mentorship carried complexities and undercurrents that would have far-reaching consequences for both master and student. Gehrman was already legendary when Maria sought his tutelage. He had established the hunter's workshop, created many of the trick weapons that would become synonymous with the hunt, and developed the codes and practices that governed hunter behavior. He represented the pinnacle of what hunting could be at its most noble, skilled, purposeful, dedicated to protecting humanity from the darkness that threatened to consume it. For a young noble seeking validation outside traditional power structures, Gehrman offered both direction and the promise of meaningful purpose. The training Maria received was comprehensive and brutally demanding. Hunter combat required far more than simple fighting ability. Hunters needed deep understanding of beast behavior, knowledge of Yharnam's labyrinthine streets and hidden passages, and the mental fortitude to face horrors that could drive ordinary people to madness. They needed to maintain their humanity while surrounded by those who had lost theirs, to make split-second decisions in life or death situations, and to carry the weight of their duty without breaking under its burden. Maria excelled in all these areas. She displayed natural aptitude that impressed even the experienced first hunter. Her aristocratic education proved valuable here. She was literate, analytical, capable of studying beast anatomy and documenting hunting techniques with precision. Her years of training with the Rakuyo had already developed the discipline and dedication necessary for hunter work, and her moral seriousness, her genuine belief in the nobility of protecting others, gave her the psychological foundation to handle the profession's darker aspects. Under Gehrman's guidance, Maria's combat style evolved into something truly remarkable. The Rakuyo, already a demanding weapon, became an extension of her will. She learned to flow between its single-blade and dual-blade configurations seamlessly, using precision strikes in one form and overwhelming combinations in the other. Her technique emphasized mobility, timing, and precision over brute force. It was combat as art form, deadly and beautiful in equal measure, perfectly complementing her aristocratic grace with practical lethality. But Gehrman taught Maria more than just combat techniques. He instilled in her the philosophical foundations of hunting as he understood it. The hunt, in Gehrman's vision, wasn't merely about killing beasts. It was about protecting humanity, preserving civilization, standing as a bulwark against chaos. Hunters were guardians, not just warriors. Hunters were guardians, not just warriors. They accepted the burden of facing darkness so that others wouldn't have to. This noble purpose resonated deeply with Maria's own moral convictions, providing her with a sense of meaning that her aristocratic background had never offered. The workshop itself became Maria's second home. She worked alongside other dedicated hunters, maintained weapons, studied beast specimens, and contributed to developing hunting techniques that would be passed down to future generations. Her noble education made her valuable in ways beyond combat. She could read and write fluently, analyze patterns, systematize knowledge. She helped document the accumulated wisdom of the hunt, creating records that would benefit hunters who came after her. During this period, Maria established herself as one of the most promising hunters of her generation. Her noble bearing, combined with exceptional combat skills and unwavering moral compass, made her a natural leader. Other hunters looked to her for guidance and inspiration. In her, they saw proof that hunting could remain a noble calling despite the increasingly dark directions the profession was taking. She embodied everything admirable about the hunt: skill, dedication, moral clarity, and genuine care for those she protected. Yet beneath the surface of this seemingly perfect mentor-student relationship, undercurrents were developing that neither party fully acknowledged or understood. Gehrman's feelings for Maria went far beyond professional admiration or even normal affection. The lore describes his emotions as a curious mania, suggesting obsession rather than simple attraction. He was captivated by her in ways that he himself may not have fully comprehended, developing an attachment that would persist long after her death and manifest in the creation of the doll. Maria, for her part, seemed largely unaware of the depth of Gehrman's feelings. She admired her mentor greatly, viewing him as the embodiment of everything noble about the hunt. Her respect was genuine and profound. She valued his wisdom, appreciated his training, and looked up to him as the ideal hunter. But her feelings remained within appropriate bounds of student gratitude toward a teacher. She saw Gehrman as mentor and respected colleague, not as a potential romantic partner. This asymmetry in their relationship created a dynamic that would prove significant in ways neither could have anticipated at the time. Gehrman was training the woman he loved, but doing so under the constraints of their professional relationship and his own inability or unwillingness to express his true feelings. Every achievement of Maria's filled him with pride colored by personal attachment. Every moment spent training her was simultaneously professional duty and personal indulgence. Every success she achieved reflected both on his teaching and his choice of the focus for his affection. The influence of Maria's aristocratic background remained evident in her approach to hunting. She maintained certain standards and protocols that other hunters might have considered unnecessary. Her equipment was always meticulously maintained, her appearance remained dignified even after challenging hunts, and she insisted on treating even beast victims with a degree of respect that spoke to her noble upbringing. She brought Cainhurst's emphasis on dignity and proper form to the sometimes crude world of practical hunting. This period represents the height of Maria's happiness and sense of purpose. She had successfully escaped Cainhurst's stifling atmosphere, while finding a calling that utilized her skills and satisfied her moral convictions. She was respected by her peers, valued by her mentor, and contributing meaningfully to protecting humanity. Everything she had hoped for when leaving Cainhurst seemed to be coming true. The noble purpose she had sought was found. The meaningful work she desired was accomplished daily. The sense of belonging she had never felt in Cainhurst's cold halls was discovered among her fellow hunters. The tragic irony, visible only in hindsight, is that this golden period was setting the stage for devastating events that would destroy everything Maria held dear. The skills she was developing, the loyalty she was building, the commitment to duty she was strengthening, all of these would eventually be turned against her own values. The very dedication to excellence that made her such an exceptional hunter would make her acutely sensitive to moral compromises. The trust she placed in institutions and mentors would make their corruption all the more devastating when it was finally revealed. The techniques Maria learned during this time would remain with her throughout her life and even beyond death. Her fighting style, her approach to problem-solving, her fundamental understanding of duty and sacrifice all trace back to these formative years in the workshop. When players encounter Maria in the nightmare, they face an opponent whose every move reflects Gehrman's teaching. Her combat style is the perfected expression of everything he taught her. Now turned to the purpose of guarding secrets, he would probably prefer remained hidden. The workshop period also established Maria's role as a bridge between different worlds. She brought Cainhurst's aristocratic refinement to the hunters, while adopting their practical approach to combat and protection. She connected the scholarly pursuits of knowledge with the street-level reality of fighting beasts. Muses of Fawitier, the Fustir, with the Finowers. She connected the street-level reality of fighting beasts with the street-level reality of fighting beasts. She embodied the possibility that these different aspects of Gehrman's society could work together toward noble ends rather than operating in isolation or opposition. But underlying all of this was the fundamental vulnerability that would eventually destroy her. Maria took her moral commitment seriously. She genuinely believed in the nobility of the hunt's purpose. She trusted that the institutions she served were worthy of her dedication. She assumed that her superiors shared her ethical framework and would not ask her to violate her fundamental principles. These beliefs, so essential to her effectiveness as a hunter, also made her susceptible to devastating betrayal when those assumptions proved false. The turning point in Maria's story begins with her involvement in one of the most significant and morally ambiguous expeditions in Gehrman's history. The scholarly mission to the fishing hamlet, organized by the academics of Bergenworth under Master Willem, would not only change the course of Maria's life, but would set in motion events that would echo through the nightmares of hunters for generations to come. Bergenworth, under Willem's leadership, had long been obsessed with human evolution and transcendence. Willem believed humanity was fundamentally limited by its current state of consciousness and biological form. His famous directive, "We are born of the blood, made men by the blood, undone by the blood. Fear the old blood," reflected both his understanding of humanity's connection to cosmic forces and his warning about the dangers of pursuing that connection without proper preparation. Yet despite his warnings, Willem couldn't resist the pursuit of knowledge. His obsession centered on the concept of gaining eyes on the inside, a metaphorical and literal process of expanding consciousness to comprehend truths beyond normal human understanding. This pursuit had led Bergenworth to investigate numerous reports of unusual phenomena throughout the region, but none would prove as significant as the discovery concerning the fishing hamlet. Reports had reached Bergenworth of a remote seaside community that had been visited by something extraordinary, a great one. These cosmic beings, existing beyond normal reality and comprehension, rarely made direct contact with human communities. But in the fishing hamlet, something unprecedented had occurred. The corpse of Kos, a maternal great one of immense power, had washed ashore on their beaches. The implications were staggering for scholars who had devoted their lives to understanding these otherworldly entities. Most great ones were encountered as living beings alien, incomprehensible, and dangerous to approach. Kos, however, had arrived as a corpse, making her the first great one that could be studied directly without the immediate danger that typically accompanied such encounters. For Willem and his followers, this represented an unparalleled opportunity to unlock the secrets of transcendence. But Kos brought more than just her corpse. Embedded within her body were millions of parasites, otherworldly organisms that had lived symbiotically with the Great One during her lifetime. When exposed to the human population of the fishing hamlet, these parasites had begun transforming the villagers in extraordinary ways. The fishermen and their families were developing new sensory capabilities, altered physiology, and what appeared to be enhanced consciousness. Their heads elongated, their bodies changed, but they retained their essential humanity and their sense of community. Most significantly, Kos carried within her womb an unborn child, the orphan of Kos. This represented something even more valuable to the scholars than the Great One herself, the possibility of studying a Great One from the moment of birth, understanding their development, perhaps even influencing their growth. The umbilical cord of this unborn Great One was particularly sought after, as these cords were known to be powerful artifacts capable of facilitating human transcendence. When word of these discoveries reached Bergenworth, Willem immediately organized an expedition to investigate and acquire these treasures. However, the scholars recognized that such a mission would require more than academic expertise. The journey to the remote hamlet was dangerous, and the acquisition of such valuable specimens might require forceful persuasion if the villagers proved unwilling to cooperate with their research goals. This is where the hunters entered the picture. Gehrman, as the first hunter and Willem's trusted ally, was approached to provide hunter support for the expedition. The official justification was protection and escort for the scholars as they traveled to a remote and potentially dangerous location. But there were unspoken implications about what might be required once they reached their destination. The scholars needed muscle, warriors who could overcome resistance if academic persuasion proved insufficient. Gehrman, despite whatever reservations he may have privately harbored, agreed to support the mission. He selected several of his most trusted hunters to accompany the scholars, choosing individuals he believed possessed both the combat skills and mental fortitude necessary to handle whatever challenges the expedition might encounter. These weren't random selections. These were the elite hunters, the most skilled and reliable warriors the workshop could provide. Maria was among those chosen. Her selection was a testament to Gehrman's trust in her abilities and his assessment of her as one of the workshop's finest hunters. She was seen as reliable, capable, possessing the moral fortitude necessary to handle complex situations. It was meant to be an honor, recognition of her status among the elite hunters of her generation. She had proven herself worthy of participating in what was being presented as a historic scholarly endeavor. The expedition party that assembled represented some of the most influential figures in Yharnam's academic and hunting communities. Along with Willem and Gehrman, the group likely included scholars who would later become founding members of the Healing Church, as well as several of the most skilled hunters of the era. Maria found herself in prestigious company, part of what appeared to be an important mission that would advance human knowledge and potentially benefit all of Yharnam. From Maria's perspective, the mission must have seemed consistent with everything she believed about the nobility of her calling. Scholars were seeking knowledge that might help humanity evolve and transcend its limitations. Hunters were providing protection and support for this valuable research. It was cooperation between academic and martial excellence, both serving the greater good. The possibility that the expedition might require violence probably seemed remote, a contingency that might never arise. The official briefings about the mission would have emphasized its scholarly nature and the potential benefits of studying a Great One. The transformed villagers would have been described as subjects of scientific interest, their cooperation assumed or easily obtainable. Any discussion of potential conflict would have been framed as defending against beast attacks or dealing with hostile creatures rather than confronting human beings who might object to their research. As the expedition prepared to depart, Maria would have been focused on her professional responsibilities, ensuring her equipment was in perfect condition, reviewing what was known about the region's geography, preparing mentally for the challenges of protecting scholars in unfamiliar territory. She would have approached the mission with her characteristic thoroughness and dedication, determined to fulfill her duty as a hunter and protector. The journey itself would have taken several days, traveling from Gehrman's urban environment through increasingly remote countryside until they reached the isolated coastal region where the fishing hamlet was located. During this journey, the expedition members would have had time to discuss their expectations and objectives, though the full implications of what they were planning may not have been explicitly stated, especially to the hunters who were there primarily for protection rather than scholarly purposes. As they approached their destination, the expedition would have begun to notice signs of the hamlet's transformation. The very environment might have seemed different, touched by the presence of the Great One whose corpse rested on its shores. The air itself might have felt charged with otherworldly energy. These signs would have excited the scholars while potentially creating unease among the hunters, who were trained to recognize and respond to supernatural threats. The stage was set for the most traumatic and defining experience of Maria's life. The noble hunter who had rejected Cainhurst's blood magic, who had dedicated herself to protecting others, was about to participate in an atrocity that would make all her previous moral struggles seem trivial by comparison. The very loyalty to her mentor and dedication to duty that had made her such an exemplary hunter would now compel her to participate in acts that would haunt her for the rest of her existence. The arrival of the Bergenworth expedition at the fishing hamlet marked the beginning of one of the most horrific atrocities in Bloodborne's lore. What transpired there would create the hunter's nightmare itself, curse generations of hunters, and shatter Maria's spirit so completely that she would never recover. This chapter of her story represents the moment when noble intentions collided with institutional corruption to produce something monstrous. The fishing hamlet, when the expedition arrived, was unlike anything the hunters and scholars had previously encountered. The village had been fundamentally transformed by its proximity to Kos and her parasites. The villagers, once ordinary fishermen and their families, had undergone radical physiological changes. Their bodies had elongated, taking on vaguely aquatic characteristics. Their heads had developed unusual proportions, enlarged to accommodate enhanced sensory capabilities. Many displayed abilities far beyond normal human parameters, able to perceive things that ordinary people couldn't detect. Yet despite these physical transformations, the villagers retained their essential humanity. They weren't beasts or monsters. They were still people. They continued to live as a community, maintaining their homes, caring for their families, conducting their daily routines. They had built a life around the presence of Kos, whom they worshipped as a benevolent deity who had blessed them with her presence. To them, the changes they had undergone weren't curses but gifts, signs of divine favor that had elevated them above ordinary human limitations. The corpse of Kos herself lay on the village's beach, a massive form that dwarfed anything the expedition members had previously seen. Even in death, she radiated an otherworldly presence that was simultaneously beautiful and terrible. Her body contained the unborn orphan, still connected by the umbilical cord that the scholars so desperately sought. The parasites that had once lived within her had spread throughout the village, creating an ecosystem of transformed life that represented unprecedented opportunities for study. Initially, it's possible the expedition attempted diplomatic contact with the villagers. The scholars, after all, were academics rather than conquerors. They may have hoped to gain cooperation through negotiation or compensation, offering the villagers rewards in exchange for access to Kos's remains. This would have been consistent with scholarly traditions and would have avoided unnecessary conflict. However, we can infer that the villagers' relationship with Kos was deeply spiritual and protective. They likely didn't view her as a specimen to be studied or a resource to be exploited. To them, she would have been a beloved deity whose rest should not be disturbed. Any suggestion of removing parts of her corpse or conducting experiments would have met fierce resistance, born of genuine religious devotion. The exact sequence of events that led from diplomatic contact to violence remains somewhat unclear in the fragmented lore. But what is clear is that at some point, the expedition's objectives shifted from cooperation to coercion. The scholars, having traveled this far and invested this much effort, were not willing to return empty-handed. Willem's obsession with gaining eyes on the inside, with understanding the Great Ones, with facilitating human transcendence, all of this made failure unacceptable. They would acquire their specimens regardless of the villagers' objections. This is where the hunter's role transformed from protection to prosecution of violence. The scholars authorized the use of force to achieve their goals. The hunters, bound by loyalty to their mission and their superiors, found themselves tasked with overcoming the villagers' resistance by any means necessary. What had been presented as a scholarly expedition became a military operation, and the skills that Maria had developed to protect humanity were now being directed against innocent people whose only crime was protecting something they held sacred. For Maria, this moment represented the complete collapse of everything she had believed about the hunt and her role within it. The noble calling that had drawn her away from Cainhurst's corruption had itself become corrupted, demanding that she participate in the slaughter of people who posed no threat to anyone, who were simply trying to preserve the sanctity of their deity's rest. The protective mission she had dedicated her life to was revealed as something far more sinister, willing to destroy an entire community for the sake of academic ambition. The villagers, despite their transformations, were no match for trained hunters. Their altered physiology may have granted them certain advantages, enhanced senses, unusual physical capabilities, but they lacked combat training, proper weapons, and tactical knowledge. They were fishermen and their families, not warriors. What followed was not a battle between equals but a systematic extermination, as the hunters methodically eliminated anyone who stood between the scholars and their objectives. The scholars themselves participated directly in the atrocities. The accursed brew, an item found in the DLC, reveals the horrific nature of their experiments. The skull of a villager was forcibly opened and searched for eyes on the inside, just as Willem had instructed. No such eyes were found, but the process left the villager's head a grotesque, bubbling mass. This wasn't abstract research conducted in distant laboratories. This was brutal vivisection performed on living, conscious human beings who could feel every moment of their torment. Maria watched as her fellow hunters and the accompanying scholars systematically violated every principle she had held sacred. The dignified pursuit of knowledge became a carnival of cruelty, with living beings treated as nothing more than specimens to be dissected and studied. The protective mission of hunting became an exercise in genocide, with an entire community destroyed to satisfy academic curiosity. The noble cause she had dedicated herself to was revealed as a facade concealing something monstrous. The lore surrounding Maria's presence at the massacre comes primarily from the location of her discarded rakuyo and the fact that she was one of Gehrman's students. While we cannot know every specific detail of her participation, her position as an elite hunter on this expedition and her subsequent psychological breakdown strongly suggest she witnessed and likely participated in the violence that occurred. The trauma was severe enough that she could no longer bear to look at the weapon that had defined her identity. The psychological impact on Maria must have been immediate and devastating. Every strike she made contradicted everything she believed about herself and her purpose. Every villager who fell before her blade represented another crack in the foundation of meaning that had sustained her since leaving Cainhurst. She had rejected her noble heritage's blood magic because she found it corrupt, only to find herself participating in something far worse. She had joined the hunters to protect people, only to find herself destroying an entire community. The aftermath of the massacre was equally horrific. The scholars harvested what they wanted from Koss's corpse, including the umbilical cord of her unborn child. They collected specimens from the transformed villagers, documented their findings with clinical detachment, and prepared to return to Bergenworth with their prizes. The surviving structures of the village were left as monuments, to what had been destroyed. The few remaining villagers, if any survived, were left to mourn their losses in isolation, their community shattered, their deity desecrated. The expedition members began their return journey to Gehrman, their mission accomplished by any practical measure. They had acquired the specimens they sought, gathered unprecedented data about great ones and their effects on human physiology, and obtained artifacts of tremendous power. From the perspective of Bergenworth's scholarly objectives, the expedition was an unqualified success. The knowledge gained would contribute to the founding of the healing church and influence Gehrman's development for generations. But for Maria, the return journey was marked by profound psychological transformation. Her fellow expedition members noted that she had become withdrawn and silent, no longer participating in discussions about their discoveries or the potential applications of what they had learned. The vibrant, enthusiastic hunter who had departed for the fishing hamlet had been replaced by someone haunted, hollow, going through the motions of living, while something essential inside her had died. She stopped caring for her equipment with her usual meticulous attention. She stopped engaging with her fellow hunters in the easy camaraderie that had characterized workshop life. She stopped believing in the nobility of the hunt's purpose or the trustworthiness of the institutions she served. Everything that had given meaning to her existence since leaving Cainhurst had been revealed as a lie, and she was left with nothing to replace it except guilt and the terrible knowledge of what she had done. The fishing hamlet massacre represents the moment when Bloodborne's law shifts from moral ambiguity to clear condemnation. The game presents many situations where right and wrong are difficult to distinguish, where all choices carry costs, where the best path forward is uncertain. But the massacre is presented without ambiguity. It was wrong. It was an atrocity. The villagers were innocent, the scholars were cruel, and the hunters who participated became complicit in evil, regardless of their previous nobility or current regrets. This event serves as the foundational sin that would eventually curse all hunters, creating the nightmare that traps them in eternal cycles of violence and guilt. Kos, even in death, possessed sufficient power to curse those who had violated her and her people. Her rage, her sorrow, her desire for justice or revenge, all of this manifested as the hunter's nightmare, a realm where those responsible for blood-drunk violence would be trapped forever, forced to confront the consequences of their actions while being unable to escape or find peace. For Maria specifically, the massacre marked the point of no return. There was no way to undo what had been done, no way to restore the destroyed community, no way to make amends that could balance the scales. She couldn't claim ignorance or accidental involvement. She had been there. She had participated. Her hands were stained with innocent blood, and no amount of subsequent good works could wash that stain away. The trauma would remain with her for the rest of her life, coloring every subsequent decision and ultimately driving her to suicide. The expedition had succeeded in its stated objectives, but it had destroyed Maria in the process. The noble hunter who had left Cainhurst seeking pure purpose had instead found the complete corruption of everything she valued, and there was no going back, no way to return to the innocence and moral clarity she had possessed before witnessing and participating in systematic slaughter. The return from the fishing hamlet marked the beginning of Maria's slow psychological deterioration, a gradual collapse that would ultimately consume the noble hunter who had once embodied everything admirable about the profession. The weight of what she had witnessed and participated in proved to be a burden far heavier than any physical weapon she had ever carried, crushing her spirit with inexorable force that no amount of skill or training could overcome. In the immediate aftermath of the expedition, Maria's behavior underwent changes that were noticed by everyone who knew her. Gehrman, in particular, watched with growing concern as his star pupil transformed before his eyes. The confidence and enthusiasm that had characterized her approach to hunting began to fade, replaced by a haunted quality that permeated her every action. Where once she had embraced challenges with eagerness, she now approached them with grim resignation, going through motions of a life that had lost its meaning. The first major symbolic act of Maria's psychological breakdown was her disposal of the rakuyo, the beloved weapon that had defined her identity as a hunter. According to the law, she threw the blade down a well, unable to bear the sight of the instrument that had been used in the massacre. This wasn't merely discarding a tool. It was the rejection of everything the weapon represented. Her skills, her purpose, her identity as a hunter, and her connection to the noble ideals that had once motivated her. The rakuyo had been more than just a weapon to Maria. It had been a symbol of her rejection of Cainhurst's blood magic in favor of pure skill and technique. Its elegant design and demanding mastery requirements had perfectly embodied her personal philosophy of achieving greatness through dedication and moral clarity rather than supernatural shortcuts. To abandon it represented the complete collapse of the worldview that had sustained her since leaving her noble heritage behind. The act of throwing the weapon down a well carries deep symbolic weight. Wells are traditionally associated with depth and hidden things, with secrets buried in darkness. By casting the rakuyo into those depths, Maria was attempting to bury not just the weapon, but everything it represented, the skills that had been perverted to evil ends, the training that had prepared her to participate in atrocity, the identity that had been corrupted beyond recognition. She was trying to erase the hunter she had been, though of course she could never truly escape what she had done. Gehrman's reaction to Maria's decline reveals the depth of his attachment to her. He watched the woman he had trained and admired disappear before his eyes, replaced by someone consumed by guilt and despair. His attempts to reach her, to provide comfort or counsel, seemed to fall on deaf ears. Maria had retreated into herself, unable to articulate the depth of her trauma or accept help from anyone who had been connected to the expedition. The very fact that Gehrman had selected her for the mission, had trusted her to participate in what became a massacre, created a barrier between them that couldn't be crossed. The broader hunter community also felt the impact of Maria's transformation. As one of their most respected members, her obvious distress sent ripples through the organization. Other hunters began to question the missions they were being asked to undertake, wondering if they too might be asked to participate in actions that would compromise their moral foundations. The expedition's success, measured in specimens acquired and knowledge gained, had come at a cost that was becoming increasingly apparent to those who witnessed its aftermath. The workshop, which had been Maria's second home, now felt different to her. Every weapon on the walls reminded her of the rakuyo she had discarded. Every hunter she encountered reminded her of the fellowship she no longer felt part of. Every discussion of technique or tactics reminded her of how those skills had been used against innocent people. The place that had once represented refuge and purpose now felt like a prison of memories and associations she couldn't escape. During this dark period, Maria made a decision that would define the final phase of her life. She accepted a position overseeing the research hall, a secretive facility operated by the Healing Church, where experiments were conducted on human subjects in attempts to facilitate contact with the Great Ones. This choice was likely motivated by desperate desire for redemption, an attempt to find some way to balance the scales after her participation in the fishing Hamlet massacre. The research hall represented, in Maria's mind, an opportunity to protect and care for experimental subjects rather than harm them. The patients housed within the facility appear to have been volunteers of some kind, though the true nature of their consent remains questionable. Some cry out that they are guilty and beg not to be punished again, suggesting they may have been criminals or those deemed heretics. Others speak of Maria with reverence, calling to her as if she were a saint or mother figure. Whether they came willingly, believing in the Church's promise of transcendence, or were coerced through social or legal pressure, the result was the same. They became subjects of brutal experimentation. This reasoning, while understandable, was fundamentally flawed. The patients may have volunteered in some technical sense, but their consent was hardly informed. They weren't told the full truth about the procedures they would undergo, the likelihood of success, or the horrific transformations they would experience. Many came from desperate circumstances, poverty, illness, hopelessness, that made the Church's promises seem attractive regardless of the risks involved. Their choice was shaped by circumstances that left them few real alternatives. Moreover, the experiments conducted in the research hall were brutal and dehumanizing, transforming volunteer subjects into grotesque parodies of their former selves. The primary procedure involved injecting mysterious fluids into patients' craniums, causing their heads to expand grotesquely as their brains were flooded with substances meant to enhance consciousness and sensory capabilities. The goal was to create individuals who could hear the sea. perceiving cosmic truths beyond normal human comprehension. The process was excruciatingly painful and frequently fatal. Those who survived the initial procedures found themselves transformed beyond recognition. Their bodies became elongated and twisted, their heads swelled to enormous proportions, and their minds were often shattered by the influx of cosmic awareness they were forced to experience. Many lost the ability to communicate coherently, reduced to repetitive phrases or wordless screams of anguish. They became living monuments to the church's ambition and the price paid by those who trusted institutional promises. Maria's role in this nightmare was both protector and facilitator. Officially, she served as caretaker and overseer, responsible for ensuring that patients received whatever comfort could be provided while experiments were conducted. Her noble bearing and genuine compassion made her well suited for this role, at least from the church's perspective. The patients responded to her with trust and affection, seeing her as a maternal figure who offered islands of kindness in an ocean of suffering. The patients' devotion to Maria was both genuine and heartbreaking. They called out to her for comfort when pain became unbearable, expressed gratitude for small acts of kindness, and looked to her as their primary source of hope in an increasingly hopeless situation. Some patients, like Saint Adeline, developed particularly strong attachments to Maria, viewing her not just as a caretaker, but as a saint-like figure whose very presence provided spiritual sustenance. Maria's genuine efforts to provide comfort within the constraints of her position included small but meaningful gestures. She gave Adeline a key to a balcony where the patient could experience fresh air and the scent of flowers from the lumen flower gardens that Maria maintained. She spoke gently to patients experiencing distress, offered what physical comfort she could, and tried to maintain some sense of dignity and humanity within the clinical environment of the research hall. However, these acts of kindness existed within a framework of institutional cruelty that Maria was ultimately serving rather than opposing. Her presence in the research hall legitimized the experiments by providing a veneer of care and compassion that helped maintain the fiction that the church's research was conducted with proper concern for subjects' well-being. Her very compassion was being exploited to facilitate greater cruelties. The comfort she provided made the overall system of abuse more palatable and sustainable. The psychological toll on Maria was immense. Every day she witnessed the degradation and suffering of individuals who trusted her, knowing that her institutional role made her complicit in their torment. The patient's gratitude and affection, rather than providing comfort, served as constant reminders of her moral compromises. She was accepting their thanks while participating in a system that was destroying them. Each expression of appreciation was simultaneously a small comfort and a fresh wound. The failure rate of the experiments was extraordinarily high. Most patients died during or shortly after the procedures, their bodies unable to withstand the trauma of the transformations being imposed upon them. Those who survived were often left in states of constant agony, their expanded consciousness bringing not enlightenment, but unbearable awareness of cosmic horrors. The few who achieved something resembling the desired communication with otherworldly forces were so fundamentally changed that they could barely be considered human anymore. Maria found herself in the impossible position of providing end-of-life care to patients who were being slowly killed by the very institution she served. She offered what comfort she could to the dying, tried to ease the suffering of those who survived but were transformed beyond recognition, and attempted to maintain some thread of human connection with subjects whose minds had been shattered by cosmic exposure. Every day brought fresh horrors, new evidence of the system's cruelty, and additional weight to the burden of guilt she already carried. The lumen flower gardens that Maria maintained within the research hall serve as poignant symbols of her attempts to preserve beauty and life within an environment dedicated to experimentation and death. These ethereal, light-emitting flowers represented her desire to provide something pure and beautiful for the patients to experience. The gardens were her small rebellion against the sterile cruelty of the research environment, islands of natural beauty in a manufactured hell. Yet even these gardens carried tragic undertones. The lumen flowers themselves were associated with cosmic knowledge and the kind of transcendence the research hall sought to achieve through brutal experiments. Maria's cultivation of these flowers represented her ongoing entanglement with the very forces that were destroying the patients she sought to protect. Even her acts of kindness were shadowed by the cosmic horror that permeated every aspect of the facility. The weight of complicity in the research hall's operations added another layer to Maria's already overwhelming guilt. Where the fishing Hamlet had been a sudden shock of violence and atrocity, the research hall was prolonged exposure to institutionalized cruelty that wore away at her sanity through constant daily confrontation with suffering she couldn't prevent. The patient's trust and affection made her complicity even more painful, as she was forced to accept gratitude from individuals whose destruction she was facilitating. As time passed, the cumulative burden of Maria's compromises began to take an increasingly visible toll. Her noble bearing remained, but it was now accompanied by profound sadness that seemed to emanate from her very soul. The vibrant, purposeful hunter who had once inspired her peers had been replaced by someone going through motions of life while being slowly consumed by guilt and despair. She was dying by degrees, eroded from within by the impossibility of her situation. The culmination of Maria's psychological torment came with a decision that would define her legacy and transform her from a tragic figure in life to an eternal guardian in death. Unable to bear the weight of accumulated guilt and the impossibility of finding true redemption within the systems she served, Maria made the ultimate sacrifice in a desperate attempt to prevent further harm from being done. Her suicide represents not just personal tragedy, but a profound indictment of the institutions that had corrupted her noble intentions. The decision to end her own life was not made lightly or impulsively. Maria's psychology throughout her decline suggests someone who had exhausted every possibility for finding meaning or redemption within the constraints of her situation. She had tried to find purpose through protecting the research hall patients, but found herself complicit in their suffering. She had attempted to provide comfort and dignity within an inherently undignified system, but realized that her very presence was being used to legitimize cruelties she couldn't prevent. Every avenue she explored led back to the same conclusion. Within the institutional frameworks that governed her existence, genuine redemption was impossible. She could offer small mercies, but these only made the larger cruelties more bearable and therefore more sustainable. She could care for individual patients, but this care enabled the system to continue destroying others. Her goodness was being weaponized against the people she wanted to help, turned into a tool that facilitated their continued exploitation. The method Maria used to end her life appears to have been cutting her own throat, a decisive and symbolically weighted choice. The throat, as the source of voice and breath, represents communication and life itself. In taking this action, Maria was silencing herself permanently, ending not just her physical existence but her ability to speak about the horrors she had witnessed. This self-silencing could suggest that Maria felt she had lost the right to speak, to bear witness, to tell the truth about what had happened. She had been complicit in atrocities. She had participated in systems that destroyed innocent people. By this interpretation, cutting her throat represents accepting responsibility by removing herself from the conversation entirely, refusing to claim victim status when she had also been perpetrator. The location of her suicide was equally significant. The Astral Clocktower, positioned at the very top of the research hall complex. This tower, with its massive clock face and astronomical instruments, represented the pinnacle of the Church's attempts to understand cosmic forces and achieve transcendence. Its mechanisms measured time and celestial movements, embodying humanity's desire to comprehend and control forces beyond normal understanding. By choosing to die in this location, Maria may have been making a statement about the ultimate futility of these pursuits and the price they exacted from those who participated in them. She positioned her death at the highest point of the institution's physical and metaphorical ambitions, her blood flowing at the summit of transcendental research, whether consciously intended or not. It reads as both protest and warning. This is where your pursuit of knowledge leads. This is the cost of your ambitions. The timing of Maria's death appears to have occurred during or shortly after her time overseeing the research hall. The blood that pools around her chair when players encounter her in the hunter's nightmare suggests that her wounds were still fresh when she was drawn into the nightmare realm, indicating that her death and her arrival in the nightmare were closely connected events. She died and was immediately claimed by Kos's curse, transformed from suicide victim to eternal guardian. But Maria's suicide was not just an escape from unbearable psychological pain. It was also a desperate attempt to prevent further harm. By positioning herself as guardian of the Astral Clocktower and the path to the fishing hamlet beyond, she sought to ensure that no one else would be able to access the site of the original atrocity. Her death became a form of eternal vigilance, a sacrifice that transformed her into a barrier preventing others from repeating the mistakes that had destroyed her. This decision reveals the fundamental nobility that persisted within Maria, even at her lowest point. She could have simply ended her suffering and been done with it. She could have sought oblivion and release from the guilt that tormented her. But instead, she chose to continue serving and protecting even in death. She accepted eternal duty, eternal isolation, eternal suffering if it meant preventing others from following the path that had led to the fishing hamlet massacre. The transformation from living person to nightmare guardian involved more than just death. It required Maria's conscious choice to remain in the hunter's nightmare rather than moving on to whatever afterlife might await. This decision represents the ultimate expression of her noble character. She chose eternal suffering over the possibility of peace, if it meant protecting others from the horrors she had experienced. The hunter's nightmare itself seems to have been created, at least in part, as a response to the atrocities committed at the fishing hamlet. The evidence suggests that Kos, even in death, possessed sufficient power to curse those who had violated her and her people. This curse trapped blood-drunk hunters in an eternal nightmare, where they would be forced to confront the consequences of their actions while being unable to escape or find peace. It functions as cosmic justice, a punishment that makes violence and bloodshed eternal, rather than achievable goals. Maria's presence in the hunter's nightmare is both punishment and self-imposed penance. She is trapped there, not just because of her participation in the fishing hamlet massacre, but because she chose to remain as a guardian. Her eternal vigil in the Astral Clocktower represents her final attempt to take responsibility for her actions and prevent others from making similar mistakes. She accepts the curse willingly, transforms punishment into purpose, makes her damnation meaningful. When players first encounter her, she appears as a lifeless corpse in her chair, blood pooling from her neck and wrists, suggesting the violent nature of her death. Her wounds still appear fresh when she awakens, blood flowing perpetually, emphasizing that she exists in a liminal state, frozen in the moment of her sacrifice, neither fully alive nor completely at rest. She is frozen in the moment of her sacrifice, eternal and unchanging. Her famous line upon awakening, "A corpse should be well left alone," carries multiple layers of meaning. On the surface, she appears to be referring to herself, warning the player not to disturb her rest. But the line also refers to Kos, whose corpse should have been left undisturbed on the beach of the fishing hamlet. The ambiguity of the reference reflects Maria's identification with both victim and perpetrator aspects of the tragedy that defined her existence. The fact that Maria retains her full consciousness and fighting abilities in the nightmare suggests that her transformation was different from that experienced by other hunters trapped in the realm. Where most nightmare inhabitants are reduced to mindless repetition of their violent obsessions, Maria maintains her noble bearing and moral awareness. This preservation of self may be connected to her role as guardian, requiring her to remain coherent and capable to fulfill her protective function. Maria's eternal existence in the hunter's nightmare represents the ultimate tragic irony of her story. The noble hunter who had sought to escape Cainhurst's corruption and find pure purpose in the hunt found herself trapped forever in a realm dedicated to showcasing the hunt's ultimate corruption. Her desire to protect others led to eternal isolation. Her attempt to prevent further atrocities resulted in her becoming a final obstacle that must be overcome to reach the very site she sought to protect. The psychological complexity of Maria's situation in the nightmare cannot be overstated. She exists in a state of perpetual awareness of her failures and compromises, forced to relive her guilt while simultaneously trying to prevent others from accessing the source of that guilt. Her noble intentions remain intact, but they are now expressed through violence against those who would follow the same path she once took. This sets the stage for the final confrontation between Maria and the player character, a battle that represents not just a test of combat skill, but a tragic collision between two individuals seeking to fulfill what they perceive as noble purposes. Maria fights to protect secrets that should remain hidden. The player fights to uncover truths that might provide understanding or closure. Both are, in their own way, trying to do what they believe is right, making their conflict all the more poignant. The encounter between the player and Lady Maria represents one of the most emotionally complex and narratively rich boss battles in Bloodborne, serving not merely as a test of combat prowess, but as the tragic culmination of Maria's story and a profound meditation on guilt, sacrifice, and the corrupting nature of noble intentions. This confrontation takes place in the Astral Clocktower, the very location where Maria ended her own life, now transformed into an arena where she must make a final stand against those who would uncover the secrets she died trying to protect. The setting carries immense symbolic weight. The Astral Clocktower, with its massive clock face and astronomical instruments, represents humanity's attempts to understand and measure cosmic forces that exist beyond normal comprehension. The tower's position atop the research hall emphasizes its role as the pinnacle of the church's transcendental ambitions, while its function as gateway to the fishing hamlet makes it the literal and metaphorical barrier between the present and the site of original sin. Maria's position in this space is equally symbolic. She sits in an ornate chair that resembles a throne, positioned as both queen and prisoner of this liminal realm between the research hall and the fishing hamlet. The blood that continuously flows from her self-inflicted wounds serves as a constant reminder of the violence that brought her to this state, while her regal bearing maintains the dignity that characterized her throughout her life. She exists in perpetual dying, forever caught at the moment of her ultimate moral choice. The player's approach triggers Maria's awakening, transforming what appears to be a corpse into a formidable opponent. This resurrection is not a return to life, but rather an activation of her guardian function, demonstrating that even in death, Maria's sense of duty compels her to action, her warning. A corpse should be well left alone. Serves as both personal plea and broader philosophical statement about the dangers of disturbing things that should remain hidden. The battle itself unfolds in 3 distinct phases, each representing a different aspect of Maria's character and the progressive abandonment of her moral constraints. This structure mirrors her life's journey from noble idealist to compromised participant to desperate guardian, willing to sacrifice everything she once stood for. In the first phase, Maria fights with her traditional style, using the rakuyo, or a nightmare version of it, in its various forms along with her Evelyn pistol. This phase represents Maria as she was during her time as Gehrman's student, skilled, elegant, and deadly, but fighting within the bounds of conventional hunter techniques. Her movements are fluid and precise, demonstrating years of practice that allowed her to master the demanding rakuyo. Her combat style during this initial phase showcases the training she received under Gehrman and the aristocratic grace that marked her noble heritage. She flows seamlessly between the weapon's single blade and dual blade configurations, using feints, dodges, and perfectly timed strikes to overwhelm opponents, while maintaining the dignity and composure that characterized her living persona. This is Maria at her best, the pinnacle of what hunter combat could be when practiced with dedication and skill. However, as the battle progresses and Maria's health diminishes, she is forced to make the same desperate choice that she made during her final moments of life. The embrace of the blood magic she had spent years rejecting. The transition to the second phase is marked by one of the most dramatically powerful moments in Bloodborne, as Maria plunges her blades deep into her own chest, unlocking the blood magic that flows through her Cainhurst heritage. This self-inflicted wound represents far more than just a combat enhancement. It symbolizes Maria's abandonment of her core principles in service of what she perceives as a greater good. The blood that flows from this wound enhances her weapons and extends her reach, granting her new attacks that would have been impossible using conventional techniques. Yet this power comes at the cost of everything she once stood for, forcing her to embrace the very corruption she had rejected when leaving Cainhurst. The psychological implications are staggering. Maria, who had defined herself in opposition to blood magic, who had chosen skill over supernatural shortcuts, who had maintained her moral purity through countless compromises, now finds herself using the power she despised most in a desperate attempt to fulfill her protective duty. The tragic irony is that this abandonment of her principles is motivated by the same noble intentions that had guided her throughout her life. The second phase showcases Maria enhanced by blood magic, her attacks trailing crimson energy, and her reach extended by supernatural force. Her fighting style becomes more aggressive and desperate, reflecting internal conflict over using abilities she had spent her life rejecting. The blood that enhances her weapons serves as visual reminder of both her Cainhurst heritage and the violence that permeates her existence. Yet even this desperate measure proves insufficient. When her health drops to approximately 1/3, the transition to the third and final phase occurs. Maria levitates briefly, unleashing another blood explosion, and this time something unprecedented happens. She enhances her blood-coated weapons with fire. This combination of blood and flame damage is unique in Bloodborne's lore, suggesting Maria has pushed her abilities beyond any documented limits in her desperation to fulfill her guardian role. The fire element that appears in Maria's final phase raises intriguing questions. Fire in Bloodborne typically associates with old hunters and their conflicts with beasts. But Maria's fire seems different, more personal, more desperate. Some interpret this fire as a manifestation of the burning guilt and passion that have consumed her, made literal through her blood magic. Others see it as a final abandonment of all restraint. The game itself offers no explicit explanation, leaving this mystery open to interpretation. During this final phase, Maria's fighting style becomes almost frenzied. Her attacks incorporate sweeping flames that can catch opponents even at medium range. Her movements retain their grace but are now tinged with desperation and fury, reflecting the internal tornado of emotions that have driven her to this extreme state. She has abandoned not just her principles but her very identity, transforming herself into something alien to everything she once was. The combat mechanics are designed to reflect her character development and the themes of her story. Players who attempt to maintain distance and fight defensively will find themselves punished by her increasing reach and aggressive pursuit. The battle rewards aggressive close-quarters combat, forcing players to engage with Maria on terms that mirror the intimate, personal nature of her tragedy. The difficulty progression serves narrative purposes as well. The first phase, while challenging, feels familiar and manageable, reflecting the Maria who existed within conventional hunter frameworks. The second phase's blood enhancement significantly increases the challenge, representing the moral compromises that made her situation more complex and dangerous. The final phase, with its combination of blood and fire, presents the greatest challenge, reflecting the ultimate extremes to which Maria has been driven. Throughout all three phases, Maria retains certain characteristics that mark her as distinct from other nightmare inhabitants. Her attacks, while deadly, are never cruel or sadistic. She fights with the measured precision of a skilled warrior, rather than the mindless fury of a blood-drunk hunter. Even in her most desperate moments, she maintains a dignity that speaks to the noble spirit that still exists within her transformed state. The arena itself participates in the battle's symbolism. The Clocktower setting, with its precise mechanisms and astronomical focus, represents the human attempt to impose order and understanding on cosmic forces. Maria's presence here, blocking access to the chaotic truth of the fishing Hamlet, embodies the tension between order and revelation, between protection and the pursuit of knowledge. The battle's conclusion, regardless of outcome, represents tragedy for all involved. If Maria succeeds in defeating the player, she has preserved her secret, but failed to find the peace that death should have brought her. If the player defeats Maria, they have overcome a noble guardian who was acting according to her conscience, making their victory hollow despite its necessity for progressing the narrative. The aftermath of Maria's defeat reveals the depths of her sacrifice. Her final words and actions demonstrate that even in this extremity, her primary concern remains the protection of others rather than her own fate. She recognizes the inevitability of the player's progress toward the fishing Hamlet, while hoping against hope that somehow the cycle of violence and revelation might be broken. Maria's boss battle, thus serves as both climax and tragedy, showcasing the complete arc of her character while forcing players to confront the moral complexity of their own actions. It demonstrates how noble intentions can lead to desperate measures, how the pursuit of protection can require violence, and how even the most well-intentioned guardians can become obstacles to truth and understanding. The connection between Lady Maria and the plain doll represents one of Bloodborne's most psychologically complex and emotionally resonant subplots, exploring themes of unrequited love, loss, and the ways in which grief can distort memory and perception. This relationship, or rather, the absence of one, illuminates both the depth of Gehrman's feelings for his former student and the tragic inadequacy of his attempt to recreate what he had lost through artificial means. To understand the significance of the doll, we must first examine the relationship between Maria and Gehrman during her lifetime. While Maria admired and respected her mentor greatly, viewing him as the embodiment of everything noble about the hunt, there is no evidence that she reciprocated the deeper feelings he harbored for her. Her respect remained within appropriate bounds of a student's gratitude toward a teacher, never developing into the romantic attachment that Gehrman secretly desired. It seems likely that this attraction went far beyond professional admiration or even normal affection. The lore describes his emotions toward her as a curious mania, which suggests obsession rather than simple attraction. Whether Gehrman himself fully understood the depth of these feelings remains uncertain, but they would persist long after her death and eventually manifest in his creation of the doll. This unrequited love was further complicated by their mentor-student relationship and the significant responsibilities they both carried as leaders within the Hunter organization. Gehrman's position required him to maintain professional boundaries that prevented him from expressing his true feelings. The asymmetry of their relationship created a painful dynamic for Gehrman, who was forced to watch the woman he loved from a distance, while maintaining the facade of purely professional interaction. His training of Maria, while genuine in its intent to develop her abilities, also served as a way to spend time with her and to shape her development according to his ideals. The pride he took in her achievements was colored by personal feelings that he could never openly acknowledge. Maria's departure from active hunting following the fishing Hamlet expedition would have been devastating for Gehrman on multiple levels. Not only was he losing his most promising student and one of the organization's most effective hunters, but he was also losing the person who had become the focus of his emotional life. Her visible distress and psychological deterioration would have been particularly painful for someone who cared deeply about her well-being, but was powerless to provide the help she needed. When Maria ultimately took her own life, Gehrman's grief was compounded by the realization that he would never have the opportunity to express his true feelings or to provide the support she had needed during her darkest moments. The finality of death, combined with the weight of unspoken emotions, created a psychological crisis that would drive him to desperate measures in his attempt to cope with the loss. The creation of the plain doll represents Gehrman's attempt to fill the void left by Maria's death through artificial recreation of her presence. Using his considerable skills as a craftsman and weaponsmith, he created a doll that perfectly replicated Maria's physical appearance down to the smallest details of her face, hair, and proportions. The craftsmanship involved speaks to both Gehrman's technical abilities and the intensity of his feelings for the woman he was attempting to recreate. However, the doll's creation involved more than Gehrman's craftsmanship alone. The moon presence, the great one that would bind Gehrman to eternal service in the hunter's dream, gave the doll a form of consciousness and the ability to move and speak. This transformation appears to have occurred as part of the larger arrangement that trapped Gehrman in his role as guide to future hunters. The moon presence's motivations for animating the doll remain somewhat mysterious, but the act serves multiple purposes within the broader narrative. By giving Gehrman a companion who resembled Maria, the Great One provided both comfort and torment, ensuring that the first hunter would be reminded constantly of what he had lost, while never being able to truly reclaim it. This psychological manipulation helped secure Gehrman's compliance with his role as guide and mentor to future hunters. When the doll first came to life, Gehrman may have experienced a brief moment of joy or relief, believing that he had successfully recreated the presence that had been taken from him. However, this initial satisfaction quickly gave way to disappointment and frustration as the fundamental differences between the doll and Maria became apparent. While the doll possessed Maria's appearance and voice, she lacked entirely the personality, spirit, and individual characteristics that had made Maria herself. The doll's personality, as experienced by players, is gentle, supportive, and somewhat ethereal, but it lacks the fire, determination, and complex emotional depth that characterized Maria during her lifetime. Where Maria was passionate about the hunt's noble purposes, the doll is merely helpful. Where Maria showed fierce independence and moral conviction, the doll displays pleasant compliance. Where Maria possessed the complex psychology of someone struggling with moral compromise and guilt, the doll exhibits a simple desire to be useful and supportive. This disparity between expectation and reality created a fresh source of pain for Gehrman. The doll's presence served as a constant reminder of what he had lost, rather than a meaningful replacement for it. Her physical resemblance to Maria made the absence of Maria's essential characteristics all the more apparent and painful. The doll was simultaneously too much like Maria to ignore and too different from her to provide comfort. Gehrman's relationship with the doll became characterized by a complex mixture of appreciation, frustration, and melancholy. He could not bring himself to destroy or abandon his creation, as it represented his only tangible connection to Maria's memory. Yet neither could he find genuine satisfaction in the doll's company, as every interaction emphasized the inadequacy of his artificial recreation. The doll's gentle attempts to provide comfort and support served mainly to highlight the absence of the authentic relationship he had desired. The psychological implications of this situation are profound. Gehrman found himself trapped not only by the moon presence's bargain but also by his own creation, forced to live eternally alongside a reminder of his greatest loss and his inability to truly recreate what he had valued most. The doll's presence made it impossible for him to forget Maria or to move beyond his grief, ensuring that his pain would remain fresh and immediate throughout his eternal service. For the doll herself, the situation presents its own tragic elements. She exists as a conscious being with her own desires and motivations, yet her entire purpose and identity are defined by her resemblance to someone else. Her interactions with players suggest genuine desire to be helpful and to form meaningful connections, but she is forever constrained by her role as a substitute for someone she can never truly replace. The doll's awareness of her connection to Maria remains somewhat ambiguous. After Maria's defeat in the DLC, the doll's dialogue suggests she feels relief, as if some burden has been lifted. "I can sense something has changed," she says. "It's faint, but a weight is lifted, ever so slightly." This moment hints at a connection deeper than mere physical resemblance, though the exact nature of this link is left for players to interpret. The parallel between Maria and the doll extends to their roles as nurturing figures. Just as Maria served as a caretaker for the research hall patients, the doll serves as a guide and supporter for hunters in the dream. Both provide comfort and assistance to those who are suffering, and both do so with genuine compassion, despite the constraints of their situations. This similarity suggests that Gehrman's creation may have captured more of Maria's essential nature than initially apparent. However, the crucial difference lies in the voluntary nature of their service. Maria chose to take on the role of caretaker as part of her attempt at redemption, while the doll was created specifically to fulfill a supportive function. Maria's actions were driven by complex motivations including guilt, duty, and genuine care for others. The doll's actions appear to flow from a simpler desire to be useful and helpful, lacking the psychological complexity that made Maria's choices so poignant. The relationship between Maria and the doll also illuminates broader themes about memory, loss, and the human tendency to idealize those who are no longer present. Gehrman's creation of the doll represents an attempt to preserve his memory of Maria, but in doing so, he may have simplified and idealized her, focusing on her gentle and supportive qualities while losing sight of the passionate and morally complex individual she actually was. This process of idealization through recreation speaks to universal human experiences of grief and loss. The temptation to remember the dead as they appeared in their best moments, to focus on their positive qualities while forgetting their struggles and complexities, is a natural part of the mourning process. However, Gehrman's ability to literally recreate Maria's physical form through the doll makes this idealization literal and permanent, trapping him in a relationship with his own simplified memory, rather than allowing him to process and move beyond his grief. The doll's existence also raises questions about identity, consciousness, and what makes an individual unique. While she possesses Maria's appearance and some of her mannerisms, she lacks the experiences, relationships, and psychological development that shaped Maria's personality. This suggests that individual identity consists of far more than physical appearance or even basic personality traits, encompassing the full range of experiences and choices that create a unique consciousness. The tragic irony of Gehrman's situation is that his creation of the doll, intended to provide comfort and preserve Maria's memory, actually serves to emphasize everything he has lost. The doll's gentle presence makes Maria's passionate intensity seem even more absent by comparison. Her simple desire to be helpful highlights the complex moral struggles that characterize Maria's later life. Her artificial nature emphasizes the authentic humanity that made Maria irreplaceable. The flower brooch that both Maria and the doll wear serves as a visual link between them, a symbol of the connection that exists despite all the differences. This shared iconography represents Gehrman's attempt to capture Maria's essence in his creation, focusing on the symbols and external markers that he associated with her. Yet, like the doll herself, the brooch is a copy of something that belonged to Maria, not the original thing itself. As our extensive journey through Lady Maria's story draws to a close, we return to the image that defines her eternal existence. The noble hunter sitting motionless in her chair at the top of the Astral Clocktower, blood flowing perpetually from self-inflicted wounds, serving as guardian of secrets too terrible to be revealed. This final tableau encapsulates everything that made Maria both admirable and tragic, representing the ultimate expression of noble intentions twisted by impossible circumstances into a form of eternal punishment. The broader implications of Maria's story echo throughout the hunter's nightmare and the larger narrative of Bloodborne, creating ripple effects that influence other characters, shape the nature of the nightmare itself, and provide commentary on the cyclical nature of violence and guilt. Maria's presence serves not just as personal tragedy, but as a focal point for examining how individual choices and moral compromises contribute to larger systemic failures and perpetual cycles of harm. The structure of the hunter's nightmare reflects the chronology of the hunting organization's moral decline. The first area, resembling a twisted version of Gehrman's streets, showcases hunters who have become blood-drunk and lost their humanity through excessive violence. The research hall represents the institutional corruption that transformed noble pursuits of knowledge into systematic cruelty. The fishing Hamlet stands as the original sin that set all subsequent corruption in motion. Maria's position at the boundary between the research hall and the fishing Hamlet makes her a literal gatekeeper between present corruption and original sin. Her role prevents most travelers from reaching the site of the first atrocity, while simultaneously serving as a final test of worthiness for those determined to confront the truth. This positioning emphasizes her function as both protector and final obstacle, someone who has taken upon herself the responsibility of deciding who should be allowed to witness the full extent of the hunter's sins. The patients in the research hall continue to call out for Maria even in the nightmare, demonstrating the lasting impact of her genuine care and compassion despite the compromised context in which it was offered. Their continued devotion speaks to the authenticity of her attempts to provide comfort within an inherently uncomforting system. Yet their presence in the nightmare also serves as a reminder that good intentions are insufficient to prevent harm when operating within fundamentally corrupt institutional frameworks. The fishing Hamlet itself, as the ultimate destination beyond Maria's guardianship, represents the unavoidable confrontation with historical truth that Maria seeks to prevent. The village, with its transformed inhabitants and the corpse of Kos on its beach, stands as a monument to the consequences of unchecked academic ambition and the pursuit of knowledge without ethical constraints. The priest who continuously utters curses against the hunters demonstrates that the harm done there continues to reverberate, creating ongoing consequences that extend far beyond the immediate victims. The Orphan of Kos, as the final boss of the DLC, represents both the culmination of the hunter's sins and the possibility of redemption through accepting responsibility for past actions. Defeating the orphan doesn't undo the harm that was done, but it does allow the tortured spirit to find peace and breaks the curse that has trapped the hunters in their nightmare. This resolution suggests that confronting and accepting responsibility for past wrongs, rather than trying to hide or forget them, is the only path to genuine redemption. Maria's role in preventing access to this resolution creates a tragic irony. Her protective instincts and desire to prevent further harm actually serve to perpetuate the cycle of guilt and punishment that the nightmare represents. By preventing others from reaching the orphan and potentially finding redemption, she ensures that the curse continues to operate and that the victims of the original atrocity remain unable to find peace. This irony extends to the nature of secrets and truth within Bloodborne's narrative. Maria's famous line about corpses being left well alone represents a philosophy that harmful truth should remain hidden to prevent further damage. Yet the game's overall narrative suggests that confronting difficult truths, however painful, is necessary for genuine progress and healing. Maria's well-intentioned secrecy becomes another form of harm, preventing the resolution that might benefit both the guilty and the innocent. The influence of Maria's story extends beyond the immediate circle of those who knew her personally. Her weapons, fighting style, and philosophical approach to hunting became part of the broader hunter tradition, influencing subsequent generations. Even as the context of her struggles was forgotten or deliberately obscured, the techniques she developed under Gehrman's tutelage continued to be taught and practiced, carrying forward her legacy in ways that divorced her methods from the moral complexities that shaped their development. The name Maria itself carries prophetic weight that becomes fully apparent only when we understand her complete story. Derived from Latin origins meaning sea or bitterness, she truly became a sea of bitterness, not through malice or cruelty, but through the accumulation of guilt and moral compromise that gradually filled her until nothing else remained. Her story is the ocean, deep and dark, beautiful and terrible, containing multitudes. The enduring popularity and emotional impact of Maria's character reflects the universality of the themes her story explores and the sophistication of the storytelling techniques used to present her narrative. Her character demonstrates that video games can engage with the most serious moral and philosophical questions while maintaining the entertainment value and technical excellence that define successful interactive media. Maria's story serves as both inspiration and warning. It demonstrates the possibility of maintaining nobility under the most challenging circumstances while acknowledging the limitations of individual action within corrupt, institutional frameworks. Her tragedy illustrates how good individuals can be trapped within harmful systems and the psychological costs of attempting to maintain moral integrity when every choice involves compromise. The complete story of Lady Maria stands as a masterpiece of character development and tragic storytelling, creating a narrative that is simultaneously specific to its fictional context and universal in its exploration of moral complexity and human fallibility. Her journey from noble intentions to tragic compromise to eternal guardianship encompasses the full range of human moral experience while maintaining the hope that understanding these patterns might help others avoid similar fates. The player's eventual defeat of Maria, necessary for progression through the nightmare, represents a bittersweet victory. We overcome a noble guardian whose motivations we understand and even sympathize with, making the triumph hollow in many ways. Yet her defeat also represents liberation, both for Maria herself, who can finally rest, and for the victims of the fishing Hamlet, who can finally receive the acknowledgement and justice they deserve. The celestial dial that Maria's defeat provides serves as both key and symbol, representing the astronomical knowledge and cosmic awareness that characterized the research hall's experiments, while also serving as the literal tool needed to access the site of the original atrocity. Its astronomical significance connects it to broader themes of human attempts to understand cosmic forces, while its function as a key emphasizes the unlocking of secrets that have been deliberately concealed. In the end, Maria's eternal vigil at the Astral Clocktower represents both her greatest sacrifice and her greatest failure. She gave everything, her life, her peace, her very soul in an attempt to prevent others from repeating the mistakes that destroyed her. Yet this sacrifice, however noble, was ultimately misguided. The truth needed to be confronted, not hidden. The victims needed acknowledgement, not silence. The cycle needed to be broken, not preserved. And so we reach the end of our journey through the tragic story of Lady Maria of the Astral Clocktower. We've walked beside her from the cold halls of Cainhurst Castle to her final stand in the hunter's nightmare, witnessing every step of her descent from noble idealist to tormented guardian. Her story, like the ocean her name evokes, is vast and deep, beautiful and terrible, filled with currents and undercurrents that continue to flow long after the surface appears calm. Maria's tragedy is not the story of someone who was evil or weak. It's the story of someone who was good genuinely, profoundly good, but who found herself trapped within systems designed to corrupt goodness and exploit nobility for harmful ends. Every choice she made, from leaving Cainhurst to training under Gehrman to accepting the research hall position, was motivated by the desire to do right, to protect others, to serve noble causes. Yet each choice led her deeper into complicity with atrocities she would never have chosen independently. This is what makes her story so devastating and so relevant. Maria represents the dilemma faced by every person who tries to maintain moral integrity within imperfect institutions. How do we serve without becoming complicit? How do we work for change without being corrupted by the systems we're trying to reform? How do we live with the compromises we're forced to make in pursuit of larger goods? These are questions without easy answers. Questions that Maria grappled with until they destroyed her. The fishing Hamlet massacre stands as the central atrocity of her story, the moment when all her noble intentions collided with brutal reality. But the massacre wasn't an aberration. It was the logical extension of institutional priorities that valued knowledge and power over human dignity and moral constraints. Maria didn't cause this corruption. She was consumed by it, ground down by systems that were designed to produce exactly such outcomes. Her time at the research hall represents the impossibility of finding redemption within corrupt frameworks. Every act of kindness she performed, every moment of comfort she provided to suffering patients, simultaneously eased individual pain and legitimized the larger system that created that pain. Her goodness was weaponized against the people she wanted to help, turned into a tool that made institutional cruelty more sustainable and palatable. And her suicide, her final desperate act, transformed into eternal guardianship in the hunter's nightmare. This represents both the ultimate expression of her nobility and the ultimate futility of individual solutions to systemic problems. She gave everything she had to prevent others from making her mistakes, yet her well-intentioned protection actually prevented the confrontation with truth that might have broken the cycles of violence and secrecy that destroyed her. The relationship between Maria and the doll adds another layer of tragedy to her story. Even in death, even in the form of an artificial recreation, Maria's influence persists. But filtered through Gehrman's grief and the moon presence's manipulation, simplified and idealized until the complex, struggling, morally serious person she was becomes a gentle, supportive presence devoid of the fire and passion that defined her. Yet despite all this tragedy, despite the overwhelming weight of guilt and compromise and ultimate failure, there is something inspiring about Maria's story. She never stopped trying. She never gave up on her fundamental values even when every institution she served betrayed them. She maintained her capacity for compassion and care even when surrounded by cruelty. And when she finally realized that redemption within existing systems was impossible, she had the courage to remove herself from those systems entirely and to take responsibility for preventing others from following her path. A fight against us, the players, represents the culmination of everything she learned and everything she became. In those 3 phases of combat, we witnessed the complete arc of her character. The skilled hunter who valued technique over supernatural shortcuts, the desperate guardian who finally embraced the blood magic she had always rejected, and the utterly committed protector who would sacrifice even her core identity in service of what she believed was right. Defeating her is necessary to progress, to reach the fishing Hamlet and confront the orphan of Kos, to break the curse and free the trapped hunters. Yet the victory feels hollow because we understand Maria's motivations and recognize the nobility that persists within her even at her most desperate. We're not defeating evil. We're overcoming someone who was trying, in her own flawed way, to prevent further evil. The lessons of Maria's story extend far beyond the fictional world of Bloodborne. She teaches us about the dangers of unchecked institutional power, about how good people can be co-opted to serve harmful ends, about the psychological cost of moral compromise, and about the limitations of individual action within corrupt systems. But she also teaches us about the importance of maintaining moral awareness, about the value of small acts of kindness even within imperfect circumstances, and about the nobility of taking responsibility even when doing so is painful. Her story asks us to consider our own positions within the systems we serve. Are we aware of the compromises we're making? Are we being used to legitimize things we would oppose if we saw them clearly? Are we maintaining our capacity for moral judgment? Or are we allowing ourselves to be numbed by routine and institutional pressure? These are uncomfortable questions, but they're necessary ones. The lumen flower gardens that Maria maintained represent perhaps the purest expression of her character, the insistence on preserving beauty and life, even in environments dedicated to destruction and exploitation. These gardens serve as reminders that even in the darkest circumstances, even within the most corrupt institutions, it's possible to create small spaces of dignity and humanity. They may not be enough to redeem the larger system, but they matter nonetheless. As we close this exploration of Maria's story, we're left with the image that began our journey. The noble hunter sitting in her chair at the Astral Clocktower, blood flowing eternally, serving as guardian of secrets she died to protect. She represents both warning and inspiration, both the possibility of nobility under impossible circumstances and the tragic inadequacy of individual goodness in the face of institutional evil. Her legacy lives on in every hunter who questions their orders, in every scholar who considers the ethical implications of their research, in every person who tries to maintain their humanity within dehumanizing systems. She lives on in the doll who bears her face, in the rakuyo that can be recovered from the well, in the lumen flowers that continue to bloom, and in the memory of players who encounter her story and carry it forward. Lady Maria of the Astral Clocktower, noble daughter of Cainhurst, skilled student of the first hunter, participant in atrocity, tormented caretaker, desperate guardian, and eternal reminder of both the best and worst possibilities of the human spirit. Her sea of bitterness runs deep, but within those depths we find not just tragedy but also meaning, not just warning but also inspiration, not just an ending but a beginning of understanding. Thank you for joining me on this long, quiet journey through one of gaming's most profound character studies. I hope that as you drift towards sleep, if that's where this story carries you, you'll carry with you not just the sadness of Maria's tragedy, but also the nobility of her struggle, the importance of her questions, and the enduring relevance of her story. May your rest be peaceful, dear hunter. May your dreams be gentle. And may you wake with renewed commitment to maintaining your own humanity within whatever systems you navigate. The hunt may be eternal, but so is the possibility of choosing compassion, of preserving beauty, of maintaining moral awareness, even when everything around us demands its surrender. Good night, and may you find your worth in the waking world.